In the wooded borderlands between New Hampshire and Vermont, 7 women are found murdered. Most have been viciously stabbed, some almost 30 times.
From the late 70s through to the 1980s, the Connecticut River Valley community was shaken by these grisly crimes.
Can a vision from the lone survivor's nightmares
I can remember this face looking right down at me.
match a son's confession of his father's brutal past
His pants and shoes were covered in blood.
and reignite the cold case of the notorious Valley Killer? I'm M. William Phelps, best-selling crime author, and I have an obsession: serial killer, cold cases.
Now, nearly 10 years later, investigators say they still need the public's help.
For me, it's personal. My sister-in-law was murdered, and her killer has never been caught. These killers are still out there. Their victims deserve justice, and just one new clue could make all the difference. I don't have a badge, but I do have something the cops don't have. Someone who understands the dark mind of a murderer.
Boy, I'm telling you, nobody can hear her scream.
Because he is one. The River Valley murders are the most horrific attacks New England has ever seen. So far, they know of 7 female victims, aged 17 to 38, mostly abducted from the roadside, brutally stabbed, and then dumped in wooded areas. Police have no active suspects for these crimes. That's why I'm taking up the hunt, armed with a secret weapon, an incarcerated serial killer who gives his take on cold cases. His code name is 13. Can he help me find the Valley Killer before he kills again? To get to 13, I have to go through his gatekeeper, criminal profiler John Kelly. For over 20 years, Kelly has helped law enforcement nationwide hunt down fugitive serial killers and bring them to justice. In 1997, he was part of the elite task force that caught the Green River Killer, Gary Ridgway, America's most prolific serial killer. When I need a psychological take on a murderer, I go to Kelly.
You know, what I'm looking at here is a blood letter. The term comes from medieval times when, you know, so-called doctors would roam around the country and try to cure people by letting blood out of them. You know, so you'd have people who were actually very comfortable with the flow of blood from another human being. That's what you have here.
The Valley Killer's first murder, of 26-year-old Kathy Milliken, established the kill pattern that would be repeated with each new victim. Excessive, frenzied stabbing, but no evidence of sexual assault. According to Kelly, that's unusual. He says most serial killings have a sexual element. I want to know, could an obsession with stabbing be the Valley Killer's signature, his psychological calling card?
The signature is actually part of the crime that's based in the killer's psyche. It's part of the killer's fantasy. I think we should talk to 13 about this.
Kelly's relationship with 13 started in 2001. It wasn't the first time he had called on a serial killer. In 1993, he interviewed John Wayne Gacy on death row before he was executed for the rape and murder of 33 teenage boys. But with 13, it was different. This time, Kelly was looking for a long-term collaborator. Someone who could help him build profiles of active cases and put more serial killers behind bars before they kill again. He was in luck. 13 says he wants to make amends. And with back-to-back life sentences, he has nothing to lose. I can't tell you how many people he killed or what he did to them, because I'm not allowed to know myself. All I know is 13 has insight that Kelly and I, and even the best detectives on Earth, don't have. First-hand experience of murder.
Okay, John.
Why do you think he uses the knife? I mean, this guy's, could use other weapons. This guy is fixated on a knife.
A knife is quiet. A knife is personal.
Knife is personal. Why do you think he stabbed these women so many times, multiple times overkill?
That could be what really excites him. You know, the feeling the knife drive into the body. It's like no other sensation, no other feeling. Or the reason he stabs his victims is the act of penetration itself. That's it.
It's a deeply disturbing insight. 13 says these attacks are sexual because the killer is using the knife as his sex organ. Psychologists call this picarism.
Picker is actually a French word, and it's someone who gets sexual gratification, sexual excitement. They get very excited and sexually gratified from stabbing another person with a sharp instrument.
If 13 is right, in the dark mind of the Valley Killer, murder and rape are united in a single, barbaric act. In 1981, this sadistic bloodletter took his second victim. On July 25th, a friend dropped Mary Elizabeth Critchley off near the Vermont-Massachusetts border. The 37-year-old college student was on her way back to Waterbury, Vermont. Her friend was the last one to see her alive. 2 weeks later, her body was found in the woods of New Hampshire, 80 miles from where she was last seen. Over the next 6 years, 5 more women were brutally stabbed to death, mostly snatched from public places. Authorities searched desperately for suspects as the body count continued to rise. Until 1988, when the killer tried to take an 8th victim. But failed. I'm about to meet the one woman on Earth who came face to face with the Valley Killer and lived. At the time of the attack, Jane Borowski was just 22 years old and 7 months pregnant.
I was a trusting person. It's a small town. I thought I was safe.
Jane's nightmare starts in August 1988 in this parking lot in Swansea, New Hampshire. She's on her way home from the county fair when she stops to buy a soda. It's midnight when a Jeep Wagoneer pulls into the parking spot beside her.
I didn't notice him getting out of his vehicle, but I noticed him walking around the back of my car.
Hey.
And next thing I know, he was trying to pull me out of my car. I was so scared I didn't know what he was gonna do. And I just started fighting. I screamed and yelled so loud that it popped all the blood vessels in my eyes. And he ended up taking a knife out of his back pocket and said to me, maybe this will persuade you to get out of the car.
Jane gets out of her car, but then her attacker starts to walk away. Pumped with fear and adrenaline, Jane makes a big mistake.
So I turned around and I said, hey, so.
And then,
Well, after saying the words that I regret for the rest of my life, he turned around and came back to me. From right behind me, he tackled me down like a football player. He was kneeling beside me and he just stabbed, just continued to stab. I got a lot of knife wounds on my hands, you know, defensive wounds, and he just continued to stab.
I mean, you're protecting your child.
I was trying to protect my baby.
Right. Then, the unbelievable happens. He stops. Jane manages to make it to a friend's house nearby. She thinks her nightmare is over. But is it?
All of a sudden, we hear a car drive by, and they slammed on their brakes. And I knew it was him.
I'm in New Hampshire, on the hunt for the Valley Killer, who has terrorized this area since the late 1970s.
As one local put it, people are spooked after the discovery of yet another body in this small town.
Jane Borowski is the only victim who survived.
I thought I was gonna die. There was so much blood that I just thought I was gonna die.
Just when the killer seemed about to strike the death blow, he stopped. But why?
Next thing I know, I'm getting up on my hands and knees, and he just slowly drove by me, looking right down at me as he was driving by me.
Did you see his face?
I saw his face. I saw the expression on his face. It was just so cold, like he had done nothing.
What do you do next?
I somehow got up and stumbled to my car and had a little bit of a hard time opening my door because he had cut the tendons in my hands. But I finally got in my car and started driving away up the road.
As Jane escapes, she realizes something terrifying.
As I was driving up the road, before I knew it, was behind him.
She's tailing her attacker.
I was so scared that he would see where I was gonna go.
She pulls into a friend's house.
All of a sudden, we hear a car drive by, and they slammed on their brakes. We heard the squealing of the tires. It stopped, and then it took off again.
Who was that?
I believe it was my attacker.
Tell me what you did after he left.
At that point, I was bleeding so much that I was starting to lose consciousness. When the police officer got there, I just kept telling him, I'm gonna die, I'm gonna die, I'm not gonna live.
Why didn't the killer finish Jane off? Maybe he thought he had. Who survives 27 stab wounds?
2 collapsed lungs. My jugular was cut. My tendon in my knee was cut. My tendon in my hand was cut. And he had damaged a piece of my liver was removed because of the damage from the knife.
But for Jane, the worst part is the chance she could lose her baby.
I ended up carrying her for another 2 months after my attack. And when I had her, she was a very sick baby. She was born with no blood pressure, and my first sight of her was in an incubator, wires and tubes coming in and out of her, and she was on a ventilator. And I was so frustrated because it wasn't fair that we had just both fought for our lives, and now here she was fighting for her life again. And I had to sit there for 10 days and watch her fight. And it was so hard. so hard.
Incredibly, her daughter pulled through. She's a survivor, like her mother. Sometimes my work cuts close to the bone. My sister-in-law, Diana, was 5 months pregnant when she was murdered. Her baby never had a chance. Jane Borowski identified the killer's vehicle, a dark-colored Jeep Wagoneer, and gave police their only eyewitness description of the Valley Killer. It doesn't look like much, but 30 years later, this sketch is still some of the best evidence police have. Someone out there must recognize this face. I just have to find them. The police who worked these murders back in the day have moved on. But in the woods outside Newport, New Hampshire, where some of the victims' bodies were found, I'm meeting the cop who inherited the case 3 years ago, Detective Sergeant Stephen Rowland. He says women around here don't expect bad things to happen. That's what makes them so vulnerable to a predator like the Valley Killer.
New Hampshire's a very safe state. It's probably one of the safer states in this country. And people that live here are very trusting. It's not uncommon for hitchhikers to get picked up by total strangers, and you know, they'll get to their destination safely, you know, where you wouldn't even think about doing that maybe somewhere else.
What is the status of this case as we stand here today?
Well, all these cases can remain open and they're under investigation. They are unsolved homicides. We have developed a cold case unit. 2 investigators are assigned to that particular unit. However, I haven't received any information on this case as far as any possible leads or any further information within probably the last year. That's when it becomes a concern, because until you find him, they will continue to kill women.
So, I mean, if I find out anything and I have some information, I could bring that to you then?
Absolutely. And I continue to look into leads. I will continue to look at any information that people may call into the cold case unit will be forwarded to me.
It's clear to me from talking to Detective Rowland that police need all the help they can get with these cases. They need new witnesses to come forward. But before I can find one, he finds me first.
I'm William Phelps.
This secret informant says he recognizes the man in Jane Borowski's composite sketch. Could this be the break investigators have been waiting for?
Well, there's a lot of suspicion from the family, and if he's guilty, then we'll know who he is. Everyone will know.
I'm reinvestigating one of New England's most notorious cold cases, the River Valley killings. My chief consultant is criminal profiler John Kelly, because when it comes to getting inside the mind of a killer, Kelly has something no one else has. A direct line to an incarcerated multiple murderer who he calls 13.
Here's a killer, a psychopath, who I need to converse with to achieve the goal of taking another psychopath off the street.
Please wait.
Okay, John.
This Valley Killer guy, do you want to tell me who you think he is?
I would say he's well-dressed, good-looking, confident, above average. From what I understand, he engages in high-risk areas where he abducts these women. Well, he's got to be very confident. And abduction seems to really excite him.
And do you think he's local to the area of the dump sites? I mean, these dump sites seem to all be within, 8-10 miles of each other.
Yes. He wouldn't feel comfortable in a strange area. He's got to know the sights.
What kind of vehicle you think this guy would drive?
Kelly has not disclosed that Jane Borowski identified the killer's vehicle, a Jeep Wagoneer. It's a test for 13.
Van, maybe a minivan.
His answer isn't far from the mark.
Something confined.
So why would it be confined?
Oh. No one can hear her scream.
Do you think he took trophies?
Wow, I would. Just something to remember. That's it.
A lot of serial killers take trophies from their victims. A piece of jewelry or a lock of hair to remind them of the kill. Ted Bundy took this habit to the extreme. He kept his victims' heads as souvenirs. And when cops raided serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer's house, they found his victims' genitalia preserved in formaldehyde. But for forensics, it's what a killer leaves behind at the crime scene that's important. Physical evidence puts murderers behind bars. In the case of the Valley Killer, the best chance of finding any lies with the only known survivor, Jane Borowski.
What type of evidence did the police collect from you, Jane?
They scraped underneath my fingernails, I know that.
Do you think you scratched your attacker?
I think I did. Either in the car with struggling, I think I may have scratched him, or on the ground.
If the police have DNA, this case could still be solved. I've arranged to meet again with Detective Sergeant Rowland at one of the sites where the killer left victims. The remains of Bernice Quartermanche and Ellen Freed were found here in 1985 and 1986.
Bernice Quartermanche and Ellen Freed were found here. As you see behind us right here, this is the Little Sugar River, and it was right in this general area they were found.
The bodies were badly decomposed. No DNA evidence of the killer has ever been found on the victims' bodies or at the crime scenes. The only hope is Jane Borowski.
So there is DNA then, some DNA available in the case to compare to if you had someone to compare it to.
Well, I don't really want to elaborate on the physical evidence that we have at this point.
Gotcha.
Because they are open investigations.
Gotcha.
But I can tell you that the physical evidence that we do have, we continue to look at with our lab personnel.
Police have to walk a fine line. They need the public to come forward with new information on cold cases, but they can't reveal all the details of their investigation. As an investigative journalist, I know how that goes, and I'm used to finding my own paths to get to the truth. The families of victims tell me things they won't tell police, because they recognize I understand their pain. In 1996, my niece lost her mother to an unknown murderer. Just like Carrie Washburn, daughter of the Valley Killer's 5th victim.
My mother was the life of the party. She loved life. When people were having a bad day, she cheered them up.
On July 10th, 1985, 10-year-old Carrie Washburn waved goodbye to her mother, Eva Morse.
The day that my mother left for work, she dropped me off at my aunt's. I really felt like something bad was going to happen, and I begged her not to go.
Eva Morse hitched a ride to work in Claremont, New Hampshire. She accepted a lift from a woman who dropped her off near a local animal hospital. Then, Eva disappeared.
I realized that my mom wasn't coming home, or something was really wrong, when I woke up and I didn't hear her voice.
For 9 months, Carrie waited.
Every time Somebody knocked on the door. I ran to answer it. Every time the phone rang, I ran to answer it. I hoped that my mom would walk through the door, like she always had.
And then, on April 25th, 1986, her mother's remains were found, 20 miles from where she was dropped off.
So he has the body, and he plumps her down, and does he kill her here? No, she's dead already. Maybe not, I don't know. Now, how the hell did he get her up here? She had to be dead, or she had to be hogtied or something. I mean, look at this terrain.
One thing I can say for sure is that the killer knows these woods. I can almost hear John Kelly read it out loud. Criminal Profiling 101.
When a serial killer has a body, that is when they are most vulnerable. That is when they are most fearful. So what are they looking for? They're looking for safety.
Safety. This killer felt safe in at least 3 different woodlands within a 50-mile radius. Then, after 7 victims, he stopped. Or did he?
She hesitated for a moment and then whispered into the phone,
"Murders."
Explore more online at investigation.discovery.com/dark minds.
The body was discovered near what's called the Cat Hole Road. Authorities say a local who was fishing discovered the remains.
When a serial killer is on the loose, authorities throw their all into the hunt because a psychopath won't stop killing until he's caught. But in 1988, after 7 murders, the Valley Killer broke the rule. I want to know why, so I've asked Kelly to call 13 again.
Why do you think he stopped killing? All of a sudden, for 10 years, this guy's killing, then all of a sudden, 1988, boom, stops.
He moved. He's either in a different area. He could be arrested on a lesser charge or something.
You're saying he could be in jail, too.
Yeah, he could be in jail. That's it.
That's it, all right. 13 has reminded me of another killer I researched before. He's incarcerated now, and he matches the Valley Killer profile. My contact in that case is a woman in southeast Massachusetts, Bonnie Kiernan. The killer I'm talking about is now in jail for the murder of Bonnie's sister, Crystal Morrison.
Her expressions never changed through school.
Bonnie's story goes like this. She and her sister, Crystal, didn't speak for 18 years. Until one night in February 2008, the phone rang.
You know, I sat up in bed when she said it was Crystal. You don't hear from your sister in 18 years, you can sit straight up, you know?
No.
Crystal told Bonnie she was calling from her boyfriend's house in Florida. She sounded nervous. Was she worried about being overheard? Then, suddenly, Bonnie's pet bird started a ruckus.
The bird started flipping out, and she said, "Who was that?" I said, "That's not a who, it's a what." I said, "It's my stupid bird, Molly." And then she just went, "Oh." And that's when I said to her, "What's going on down there?" And she hesitated for a moment, and then whispered into the phone,
"Murders."
In the very next sentence, when she said,
"What's your bird's name?"
I had just told her Molly.
Yes.
I waited, it was like 10 seconds, and I went, oh my God. Missing Molly Bish.
In 2000, 16-year-old Molly Bish was abducted from a swimming pond in Warren, Massachusetts, just south of the Valley Killer's known hunting ground. In 2003, her decomposed remains were found in some nearby woods, but police found no evidence to identify her killer. In 2008, after talking to her sister, Bonnie went to police with the tip. Was her sister's boyfriend Molly Bish's killer? She was terrified for Crystal's life, but she was too late.
4 days later, I get a knock at the door, and it was 4 cops. And so they sat me down, and they told me that my sister was a victim of a homicide. My sister was stabbed over 39 times. They stopped counting at 39.
For me, this is where the profile starts to line up with the Valley Killer. The excessive stabbing matches his style of murder. Plus, Crystal and her boyfriend used to live in the area where the Valley Killer hunted before they moved to Florida. Were Molly Bish and Crystal the Valley Killer's 8th and 9th victims? It's an angle investigators have never pursued. Crystal's boyfriend was never convicted of Molly Bish's murder, but he is now serving 25 years in a Florida prison for Crystal's murder. Maybe 13's right, and the Valley Killer is already behind bars. It's a new person of interest after all these years. And before I get a chance to look deeper, I get a lead on another potential suspect. What's going on? A stranger has come forward with a decades-old secret. He thinks he knows who the Valley Killer is. And for the first time ever, he's going public. The contact wants to remain anonymous, to protect his family. And if he's proved wrong, to protect who he's accusing. His father.
So first I want to thank you for coming. A very courageous thing to do. I applaud you for what you're doing. We're trying to get to the truth.
Well, there's a lot of suspicion from the family about my father. And if he's guilty, then we'll know who he is. Everyone will know.
The contact's mother, now deceased, saw the composite sketch of the killer as described by Jane Borowski and had a terrifying realization. It was a dead ringer for her husband. She told this story.
One night he came home drunk. He came in the house with no shirt on, but his pants and shoes were covered in blood.
You're covered.
And she never asked him any questions about it. She was in mortal fear. Her response to that was to take the clothes and burn them. The next day on the news on the television, she saw that a female had been murdered within a mile or so of a bar that my father frequents. And this caused her a lot of anxiety. And once again, she never spoke a word to anyone.
It sounds to me like your mom died with some secrets, right?
Most definitely.
It's only circumstantial evidence so far, but there's more. The Sun goes on to paint a portrait of a violent and dangerous man.
My father had issues with women, with all of them, daughters, mother, and wives. He had rage issues and would completely get out of control.
Know your place.
We had lived in Philadelphia, actually, for a short period of time. And he come home from work. He didn't like what she had made for supper. We lived on a second-floor apartment. And he had a fight with her, and he threw her out the window and held her there by her hair and threatened to drop her if she opened her mouth one more time.
But for my contact's mother, some stories were just too painful to tell.
She said that he was a deviant, and that's kind of where she left it with me.
A sexual deviant.
A sexual deviant.
And she just left it there.
I never asked her. Some of these things was too difficult for her to talk about.
From Philadelphia, the family moved to a farm in Massachusetts, where they bred their own livestock.
He butchered the pigs and chickens on a regular basis.
And I mean, did he do it the way that you're supposed to do it, humanely, or did he have his own little way of doing things? Did he use a knife?
When he killed the pigs, he would lure them over to a food trough, and when they would lean over to start eating, he would just hit them between the eyes with a hatchet.
Between the eyes?
Yeah, he would stick them between the eyes, and they would run around with a hatchet stuck in their head.
Somebody who enjoys killing does something like that.
He had no conscience.
And then this.
My father owned a Jeep Wagoneer, and I rode to work with him in that Jeep Wagoneer every day.
Do you think your dad is the Valley Killer?
My being here says that I think he's capable. I think Dad's capable of being a monster. Is he that monster? I don't know if Dad did these Valley killings or not, but I just think this is something we need to find out.
And so, with two new strong persons of interest, this man's father and Crystal Morrison's boyfriend, I need to go back to the one person who has the Valley Killer's face etched into her mind. Survivor Jane Borowski. Will she recognize one of them?
Have you ever had a reaction before to a person of interest in this case, like you're having right now?
No.
For decades, the Valley Killer has gotten away with murder, while the families of his victims suffer. Jane Borowski and her daughter are the only ones who survived this monster. But for Jane, the nightmare returns every time she closes her eyes. And she won't have peace until the Valley Killer is identified.
I try to just live one day at a time. I have to take care of my family, but I struggle. I've been in the hospital 3 times for depression, 2 times for suicide attempts. My attacker has been a part of my life for 22 years. Even though I don't see him, I don't know who he is, maybe if he's caught, I can let that go.
I want to help Jane heal and move on. So I'm going to show her photographs of the 2 new persons of interest I've developed.
Hi.
Will her nightmares finally end?
This is difficult stuff, I understand. But I have some new information I want to share with you. I have some photos. I'd like to show them to you to get your reaction.
First, I show her the convicted murderer of Crystal Morrison, serving 25 years in a Florida prison. I can't reveal his identity on screen because he hasn't been charged with the Valley murders.
No.
No reaction at all to that?
No. No.
No, huh?
I don't see anything. I was once told that as soon as I saw a photo of him, I would know it.
And I'm showing you a photo, and...
No.
Next, I introduce Jane to my new contact, who thinks his father could be the Valley Killer.
Jane, I brought some photos of my father I'd like you to look at.
Again, I can't show his face, and maybe this time, I don't need to, because Jane's face says it all.
I just need a minute.
Sure.
The hairs on my arms are raised.
It's almost like I can remember this face looking right at me as he was driving by. The chin, the cheeks, the hairline, the mouth, the eyes.
Have you ever had a reaction before to a person of interest in this case, like you're having right now?
No. Nope, I'd have to say, I've seen quite a few photos, and this one definitely raises the hair on the back of my neck.
Jane's reaction is chilling.
Okay. She sees something that we see, myself and my family. When my mother first saw this profile sketch on television, she couldn't believe. That's the father of my kids. And she was just floored by it.
Has Jane's attacker been identified after all this time? And if so, where is he now? Gone to meet his maker. He died in 2008. Jane wanted to see him caught, but at least 6 feet under, he can't hurt her anymore or kill any more women. And maybe now, at last, her nightmare is over.
I want to thank you.
But for the man's son, a visual match is not enough. Is his flesh and blood a murderer? He wants the kind of proof only DNA testing can provide.
If I could match my DNA to any DNA they have from any of those cases, my family could get some answers. That's what I want done.
The Y chromosome is passed from father to son and is usually identical. So if the police have viable DNA from Jane's attacker, it could be compared against my contact's sample, and he'll get the answer he needs. I'm putting my contact in touch with the New Hampshire State Police. His DNA could be the most important evidence in the case so far. It needs to be handled properly.
Detective Rowland. Yeah, M. William Phelps. Good, how you doing? Listen, I told you I'd contact you if I had any information.
Like me, the victims' families, and the brave man who told me his story, law enforcement continues to strive for answers in this case and to identify the Valley Killer, dead or alive. So what can we learn from all this? It's never too late to come forward. Authorities need your help to catch killers, and the families of victims need answers. If you can help, reach out to these contacts and visit the Dark Minds website.